What I'm going to talk today about is the story of DePIN, but I'm going to do it through the lens of myself, Hotspotty, which is the company I work for as the head of growth. The story of Hotspotty is deeply interwoven with that of Helium. Hotspotty is one of the ecosystem partners that probably helped the network scale more than potentially anyone else in terms of helping develop what we call the host management or fleet management model. So the idea of hosting hotspots at scale and then being able to pay out people with revenue splits and things like that. So I'm going to tell a little bit about that story, but most importantly, what grew out of Helium, the genesis of DePIN, and then at the end, a new service that we'll be releasing that I think is going to be really relevant to you guys, especially if you're interested in the space, and that we think is going to give wings to DePIN to help drive the next wave of growth in Web3 and actually innovate and fundamentally improve institutions that just a few years ago I think nobody thought had anything to do with Web3, that Web3 couldn't even touch. So it's pretty exciting. So without further ado, most stories start with people, so I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and the founders, Daniel Andrade and Maxim Goossens of Hotspotty. So I come from a traditional physical infrastructure background. So basically, I was flying around the world, looking a bit heavier and goofier back then. This is before I lived in Europe. And what I did was, this here is in Papua New Guinea. This is actually the world's second largest coffee exporter. And this is a wall of keys in Ecuador, so in one of the major cities of Ecuador for a telecom operator. And basically what I did was I tried to resolve security issues, vendor management, efficiency, workforce issues for all of these companies. So for instance, if a key goes missing and a cell site goes down for some silly reason, and this $2 to $3 key is gone and no one can access the site, sometimes that site is down for 6 hours, 24 hours, regulator penalties come into play, there's a blackout in a certain cell, all because of a $2 key. So what I realized over time was I was dealing with a lot of senior vice presidents of MNOs, mobile network operators. I was dealing with their investors, I was dealing with all kinds of people in the space. 80% of my market was telecom. And what I realized was that there are a lot of inefficiencies in these companies. It's unbelievable. They have billions and billions of dollars, but the way that they do a lot of the things is very legacy, a little bit like a dinosaur. And the way that works, give or take, is you have these MNOs that operate a little bit like a cartel all together. They're very close with the regulator. They have their bros at the asset management companies and the investment banks. And then they have a network of contractors. So they go to raise billions of dollars in capital, often through debt. They then use that to hire a big OEM like Ericsson, Huawei, whoever, who then subs out work to general contractors, who then sub it out again to subcontractors, who then sometimes resub it out again to other subcontractors, until you have tens of thousands of people deploying billions of dollars of infrastructure over 5 to 8 years to make the next wave of connectivity, 3G, 4G, 5G, with the hopes that then they can increase the price of their plans, recoup a little bit of the investment, pay off all the debt, and maybe still have enough profit to make the stock price go up a bit so that they can then prepare for the next rollout of 6G or 7G. And it's highly inefficient, right? So I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. Why are they flying me around the world to figure out issues with keys? And these companies are willing to pay millions of dollars to solve issues around locks and keys, just to get a little bit more efficiency in their rollout that still takes 5 to 7 to 8 years and costs billions of dollars. But for 30 plus years, the whole world agreed that there is no better way. It's just this way. So it doesn't matter if you're in China, if you're in the US, if you're in Brazil, this is how telecom networks are managed, right? This is how they're rolled out. And that's what I believed as well. That was until Daniel and Max, over here, the founders of Hotspotty, who were some of the first people to deploy Helium gateways in Europe, knocked on my door because I had a nice location and wanted to install an IoT hotspot on my roof. That changed everything. Suddenly, who was the infrastructure owner? Who is the MNO? Who's the investor? Suddenly, all of the incentives are aligned. This issue of service level agreements, quality of service, like if the site goes down, you have to send a contractor there to get in and fix everything, is removed. Because I'm already incentivized to fix it myself because I'm getting paid to have it in my house. It changed everything. So basically what Helium did is they essentially flipped the model on its head. So instead of going from top down, where everything is centralized and it requires billions of dollars in investment to roll out a network, you go bottom up and you bootstrap the entire thing. And it costs you almost nothing. It costs you a bit of marketing, but that's just to incentivize your community, which you then give crypto to then install and manage radios and various types of miners, because essentially these are miners, right? So that was my introduction into Hotspotty and into Helium. So eventually they invited me to work with them because they're nice people and they can tolerate my nonsense. But what happened was that as Max and Daniel were rolling out all of these hotspots across Portugal, Belgium, and the Netherlands, they were running into problems, right? So how do you assess locations? How do you manage all your different hosts? How do you know how much to pay people? How do you automate the payouts? What about taxation? So essentially, they took sort of a Web 2.5 approach and kind of bridged the worlds and created sort of an ERP CRM that then became wildly popular in the Helium ecosystem. About 60% of the hotspots were managed through Hotspotty. We have 280,000 plus users today. Very high engagement time and various other metrics that show traction. This is more of the legacy solution. So actually what I'm going to talk about later is sort of shifting away from this. But this is how Hotspotty was bred, right? So what this essentially meant, though, and what's so interesting, is that this was the beginning of what we call the hosting model, or fleet management from a DePIN point of view. And what that was going to someone's house like me, because I had a good location, paying me some money to host a hotspot, and in turn paying me actually in crypto, in HNT, which means that I needed a wallet. Now, at the time, I wasn't very crypto native. I got involved in crypto in 2017, yes, but I bought Ripple, was my first asset, and that was 5 days, I think, before it completely crashed, because they were supposed to be doing some kind of partnership with like Visa or Amex or something. Didn't happen. I couldn't off-ramp because Coinbase and my banks refused to integrate. I think that was much more of the problem with my banks. And basically, I was just thinking, like, maybe this whole crypto thing isn't for me. I graduated in 2008 in the US, and if you recall, there was this little thing with Lehman Brothers, which set off the global financial crisis. So I wasn't super trustworthy of anything financial. Like, if there's not clear, tangible value being produced, if it's a derivative of a derivative of a derivative, I don't want to touch it. If it looks like a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme, I don't want to touch it. So I always thought with crypto, I was a bit skeptical. I was like, where's the actual tangible value? Until I saw Helium, and it was very close to home. It was something that I was working on. They rolled out almost 1 million nodes across the entire world, from the US to China, in 3 years. This was unheard of. There was never a network in history, at least an IoT network in history, that was able to do it so fast for so little. So now it actually made sense. Now I was like, okay, crypto has a use case. But what was interesting is then I told my friends about it. They got onboarded into wallets. They started going down the rabbit hole thinking, okay, where's the liquidity? Okay, maybe I'll buy some Ethereum. Wait, what are gas fees? Okay, so a DEX, what is the difference between a DEX and a SEX? And all of a sudden, we were all talking this language that just a few months before none of us knew. And it was because of this, right? So that is a very important point, which I will come back to. There we go. So what is most relevant is that Helium is more than just a project, right? Yeah, they're still going on. It's a successful project, yes. But what they actually did was set an example that the rest of the world kind of sat back and watched and thought, whoa, what is this? What if we applied this to electricity distribution? What if we applied this to satellites and navigation systems and vehicle telematics? They launched an entire industry, or not even an industry, I think that's the wrong word. They launched a movement. They launched a framework to build networks, which is now known as DePIN, so Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. And at the same time, Hotspotty created a framework to scale it, right? So what is DePIN? Okay, it utilizes blockchains, various blockchains. It doesn't have to be Solana, it could also be Polygon, it could be whatever. A lot of the really cool DePIN projects are on Solana, which is quite exciting. And what they do is they coordinate millions of actors, potentially, to deploy and operate physical infrastructure. So in ways that are often cheaper, faster, and more efficient than what could be done without crypto incentives, okay? The TAM is massive. So Masari did a little analysis a few months ago, and they projected that by 2028, the total addressable market that could be innovated or improved upon is 3.5 trillion with a T dollars, right? So this gives you a quick overview of DePIN. There's now over 130 projects, known projects, and probably 2 to 3x that operating in the shadows that haven't been discovered yet. This includes some big names like Filecoin, Arweave, and stuff that are more on the soft side, where you're dealing more with compute and server infrastructure. And then you have the more traditional DePINs like Helium that involve a physical miner that's more location dependent on this side. So these are like sensor networks and telecom networks, et cetera. So This is a quick overview of some really cool projects. You guys can check these out more on your own. Hive Mapper is Solana native. Basically, if you look at Google Maps, they're deploying vehicles that cost about $1 million, full of all kinds of interesting, like spatial and imaging referencing devices. But you can only deploy $1 million vehicles so fast and in so many locations. And there's certain locations that are basically too dangerous to deploy them at all. So what happens is that the refresh rate on the maps is very bad. It's very poor. It's not being updated very often. So what if you put these dash cams inside of all the Ubers and Bolts out there to get real-time data that's refreshing on a daily basis so that your maps are way more up to date? You incentivize those drivers through honey tokens, through crypto. WeatherXM, hyper-localized weather data to get much more accurate forecasts. I mean, how many times has your weather app been completely wrong? Now imagine if you had networks of IoT sensors all over the world to get super local data for hyper-accurate forecasts. Demo, this is quite an exciting project. Vehicle telematics, you have a digital identity, why can't your vehicle as well? And there's a lot of data to monetize in your car, tire pressure, fuel efficiency, speed, etc. Why can't you choose to monetize that data? And what if you had an entire network of maintenance providers and other people in the ecosystem that also could use your vehicle's digital footprint as well? React, virtual power plants. So it's the idea that at certain times of the day, there's peak load, right, when everyone's turning on all of their devices. What if you had a little device in your home that could drop your AC by 1 degree Celsius? That doesn't do much with one home. But across 10 to 20,000 homes, if they all drop at the same time, it completely rebalances the load, making the entire grid more resilient. That savings for the electricity utility can then flow back to the users via tokens. So the common question with crypto is, where's the real world use case, right? There's a lot of naysayers, from Gary Gensler to you name it, right? And nobody knows exactly how many wallets there are. I've heard a huge variation in numbers, but it's somewhere around 100 million. And a lot of those are owned by the same individual, right? You might have 10 wallets by the same person. So that means there might only be 10 million individuals actually holding crypto wallets in a world of almost 8 billion people. How can we change this? And most of those people are degens, right? They look more like this, right? Avatars and NFTs. But what about older couples in their 50s? What about the blue-collar workers? What about everybody else who might not be as educated on the internet or programming? You know, how do you drive adoption for the next billion people? This is where DePIN is very interesting. Because what's important is not necessarily how it works, that it's actually a crypto solution. It's what it provides. It's not about how, it's about why. Can you roll out infrastructure for 1/100th the cost and 10x the speed to provide connectivity in a part of the world that had no access to 4G or 5G before? That's what matters. And that's what's interesting about DePIN, is that it can literally change the world, and people don't necessarily need to know how it works. But to get there, to drive this next wave of mass adoption, to find the next Heliums of the world, to onboard the next million or 100 million users into Web3, there are some speed bumps or hurdles along the way, right? So one is a lack of capital. Very few DePINs have even reached a Series A. There's not a lot of money flowing through the ecosystem yet. A lack of talent. You have about 130 companies in DePIN versus 2,000 plus in DeFi. So a lot of the most talented devs and founders might not be looking at going into the space. Community management is hard. You're already dealing with some super complex industries like satellite navigation, decentralized AI compute. And then on top of that, you have to figure out how to keep hundreds of thousands of inherently selfish actors motivated, right, and aligned. Then a lack of credibility, because for the tokenomics to work, you need a demand side. You need to sell your services to someone. But if these traditional industries look at crypto like, oh, no way, and they don't trust you, well, it becomes very hard to keep your tokenomics stable and to generate demand. So, meet what we're currently calling DePIN Hub. So DePIN Hub is the one tab that anyone interested in DePIN needs to keep open. So basically, it's your one-stop shop for everything DePIN. We're starting out with news aggregation. So it's going to be intelligent business, and well, it's going to be business intelligence generated in an intelligent fashion, scraped across the entire internet, including community and social metrics, things like Discord growth, community sentiment, as well as traditional news, tokens, quantitative and qualitative data, all together in one place where you can filter out all the noise and be notified only about the things you care about. Changes in a token price for a certain project, projects that are now available in your geography, certain regulatory changes that might be affecting things related to DY. You can get it all here in one place. What's the purpose? To generate a virtuous cycle, to kickstart a flywheel. So basically, DePINs, the projects themselves, they create a use case, they might launch a token, but they need a community. They need people involved to mine. So then you have the community. Through DePIN Hub, we have 230,000 users already in our database of DePIN enthusiasts. It's the largest independent database of DePIN people in the world. So we have an advantage to help these projects kickstart their traction, right? And actually get the community interested and get engaged. That then in turn, to make the networks grow and to make the token go up in value, they need to bring on more people into the network. So this leads to K-factor, it leads to referrals, right? This leads to onboarding more and more wallets into DePIN, generating more traction for the project, which is exactly what the VCs want to see, to then inject capital back into the DePIN project, which then kickstarts the flywheel all over again. So these are some sneak peeks into what we're going to be releasing. So you can see different leaderboards based off different verticals in DePIN. You can see interesting articles on the internet summarized with the key takeaways for you, different categories, filtering. You can also see social metrics, so you can track. A lot of these projects are really young, right? Like, they don't have tokens issued yet, the vast majority. So how do you know what's the next hot project? If you got in on Helium early, there were big, big rewards to reap, right? But you needed to get in at the right time. This will help you determine when is the right time, so you can discover and monitor the key projects. So if you're interested, and I hope that you are, please go to depin.hotspotty.net, join our waitlist. We're going to be officially launching this month in November. I also suggest that you join our newsletter. We have a really cool newsletter. Like I said, we have 230,000 DePIN readers and enthusiasts in the world. We're going to be upping the content of our newsletter, a lot more really interesting articles, guest writers, going from a monthly cadence to a bi-weekly cadence and eventually a weekly cadence. So you'll be able to hear a lot about the news, about the release of DePIN Hub, all from our newsletter as well. So, in the end, coming from originally a non-crypto enthusiast, non-crypto native person who is now somewhat crypto native, imagine this at scale. Imagine this across 1 billion or 2 billion or 3 billion people. Driving connectivity, AI, compute, navigation, all because of Web3 dynamics in the background. This is potentially huge. And I really think this is going to be the next wave that drives the bull run, the next bull run. I think the next bull run will be defined partly, if not, 75% or more, by DePIN. DePIN with a bit of DeFi, yes, with a bit of a few other things, but primarily, I think, by DePIN. So, as an American, you know, I had to throw in one thing with Abraham Lincoln, but the best way to predict the future, in Abraham Lincoln's own words, is to create it. So let's not wait around and assume it's going to be done for us. Let's be part of it. Let's be proactive about it. Let's build it. So join DePIN, hotspotty.net, and I'll see you guys in the future. Thank you.